You're listening to The Foreign Desk, first recorded at midday London time on Saturday the 28th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. Within the last few hours, the Israel Defense Forces have declared that yesterday's massive airstrike on a Hezbollah headquarters in the southern suburbs of Beirut killed the organization's long-serving Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah. This special live edition of The Foreign Desk assesses the motivations for and likely ramifications of an assassination extraordinary and seismic even by the tumultuous standards of recent Middle Eastern history. Hassan Nasrallah would never have been under any illusion about the risks he was running. He inherited the leadership of Hezbollah in 1992 when his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was killed by helicopter-launched Israeli missiles which struck his motorcade. Israel tried to do much the same to Nasrallah during the short Israel-Hamas war of 2006. Israel bombed his house and his office, but missed him. Since October last year, when Hezbollah began a sustained missile campaign against Israel in sympathy with Hamas in Gaza, Nasrallah must have had some sense of the net tightening. Several senior Hezbollah officials had died in targeted strikes of one kind or another, as had Hamas chairman Ismail Haniyeh, even before last week's explosions of personal communications devices used by Hezbollah members, which killed dozens, injured thousands, and perhaps made it necessary for Nasrallah to conduct meetings in person at headquarters. What is left of Hezbollah now? Will Hassan Nasrallah's apparent death inevitably inflame the region further, or might things actually become calmer with this perennial agitator removed? And will Iran feel obliged to avenge the passing of their protégé? This is The Foreign Desk, live. And welcome to a special live edition of The Foreign Desk. I'm Andrew Mueller, and we are joined first of all by David Wood, senior analyst for Lebanon at the International Crisis Group. He joins us from Beirut. David, there's been a couple of hours in Lebanon now to absorb this news, or at least what Israel's defense forces seem pretty certain is news. Has there been much in the way of obvious reaction in Lebanon?
Hi, Andrew. So I think that the obvious reaction from people has been of both shock and confusion. And from the outset of this conversation, I think we need to stress that we're entering truly uncharted territory here. And perhaps even in the wildest dreams or, the scenario projecting that was done from the outset of this war, I don't think that we thought we'd find ourselves here in late September 2024. But the reality is that if it is true that in fact Hassan Nasrallah has been killed, and Hezbollah has not confirmed this yet, then it does represent a potentially game-changing moment in this war. And that is because while it's important to stress that Hezbollah is a group that is structured around institutions, and you mentioned that al-Musawi, his predecessor, Nasrallah was appointed to replace him within 24 hours. So someone like Hashim Safiuddin or another senior Hezbollah figure, if Nasrallah is dead, will be quickly appointed. But it remains to be seen whether the new Secretary General would have the same standards as Nasrallah. I mean, this is a leader who looked eye to eye with the Ayatollah Khamenei, and indeed after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, reportedly took over a lot of the strategic direction of Iran and its allies. So it's without a doubt, if confirmed, a massive loss for Hezbollah.
But within Lebanon itself, how much of Hezbollah's authority was invested in the person of Hassan Nasrallah, who, of course, had been in charge of this organisation for an extraordinarily long time, 32 years?
So again, I think it's worth remembering that Hezbollah has always been more than just Hassan Nasrallah. But without a doubt, and in terms of projecting the party's message, not only to its supporters in Lebanon, but to its supporters throughout the region, but also in terms of explaining Hezbollah's position to its opponents, both local and abroad, Nasrallah was a unique figure. Very often, Lebanese politicians of all stripes will make public addresses, but whenever Nasrallah spoke, and not just during this conflict, the whole country listens. So again, I think it remains to be seen whether Hezbollah can find someone as charismatic as Nasrallah to fill into his shoes. The other thing that's worth considering is that Nasrallah, throughout his 3 decades tenure as the Secretary General of Hezbollah, was actually, despite his reputation abroad, a relatively cautious person and believed in the concept of strategic patience. And we've seen that during this war, when Hezbollah has trod this fine line, or tried to, between maintaining a support front until there's a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, a support front for Hamas and the Palestinians, but also calibrating all retaliations for Israeli operations to try to prevent a massive retaliation and escalation into full-scale war. So it is distinctly possible that whoever replaces Nasrallah, if he is in fact dead, could be a much more radical and aggressive leader of Hezbollah.
I mean, if his death is confirmed by a statement from Hezbollah in the next few hours and days, how mixed is the reaction in Lebanon likely to be? Because there will be Lebanese who will not be, I think it's fair to say, entirely displeased at the idea of Nasrallah no longer being with us.
Sure, and there are already some people in Lebanon who are making the argument that this could potentially be a breakthrough in the war and lead to Israel being satisfied that it's made a major achievement and that it's crippled Hezbollah's leadership, taken out many weapons and moved towards perhaps imposing a diplomatic solution. But on the other hand, there's a very dangerous strain to these kinds of arguments, because if some of Hezbollah's rivals within Lebanon were to perceive Nasrallah's apparent death as an opportunity to fill the vacuum and to challenge Hezbollah's influence domestically in Lebanon, that could lead to an incredibly scary scenario where you would have not just the threat of continued Israeli operations, and it seems as though Israel's not letting up. All day there's been strikes carried out in Daher in the southern suburbs of Beirut, but also in the Bekaa Valley in the south. You would also have the additional threat of potential domestic disturbances from rivals to Hezbollah who might see this as an opportunity to seize political power back from Hezbollah.
I mean, is it possible that amid that ghastly and familiar sounding scenario you described, because that must be something that is weighing on the imaginations of Lebanese people, some sort of rerun of the civil war of 1975 to 1990, from which, of course, Hezbollah sort of emerged in the first place. But is it at all possible that one party that might be able to fill any such vacuum might actually be Lebanon's government, which we do hear remarkably little from?
So, as we know, the Lebanese government and state in general has been in a state of economic catastrophe since October 2019 with the ongoing economic crisis in Lebanon. We know that the strongest public institution remaining in Lebanon is the Lebanese army. However, the Lebanese army has always been hesitant to confront Hezbollah with force and prefers instead to work alongside the party. And the reason for that is the Lebanese army is conscious of the risk of its own ranks disintegrating should it confront Hezbollah. We also, perhaps at this stage, should not overestimate the damage that has been done to Hezbollah. It's clearly significant, but we simply don't know right now exactly what Hezbollah's military capability is following the past year, but especially the past 2 weeks of intense attacks. But what we do know is that Hezbollah will be more prone, I believe, in this kind of scenario where it's been weakened and attacked and people are scared and frustrated amongst its supporter base. It would not respond to any of these sorts of domestic threats to its power, particularly involving violence, in a way that would be a risk that Lebanon could seriously assume. So again, I think that it's time to preach calm, not just in terms of the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, which needs to de-escalate, but also domestically.
David, thank you for joining us. That was David Wood of the International Crisis Group in Beirut. You are listening to The Foreign Desk. This is a special live edition of The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller. Hassan Nasrallah's apparent demise is obviously the closing of a chapter, if not necessarily of the entire story. For a reminder of that story so far, here is an edit of Foreign Desk Explainer 389, first broadcast in October 2023, as Hezbollah commenced its campaign of bombardment of Israel in the weeks after the Hamas massacre of October 7th. Hezbollah coalesced in the 1980s during Lebanon's interminable civil war, originally as a Shia militia heavily backed by the newish revolutionary regime of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. Their animating purpose was the reversal of Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982, a victory Hezbollah claimed when Israel eventually withdrew from Lebanon in 2000. The name is a contraction of the Arabic Hezbollah, or Party of God. Hezbollah's emblem depicts a clenched fist emerging from one letter of the organization's name to grasp a Kalashnikov rifle. Along the length of the weapon runs the Quranic quote, "Then surely the party of God are they that shall be triumphant." Beneath the logo is the sub-billing, "The Islamic Resistance in Lebanon." Rendered in green on gold and considered purely on its own merits, it is an arresting piece of graphic design and features on souvenirs widely available in Lebanon and Syria. Flags, baseball caps, keyrings, and friendship bracelets. Hezbollah's principal founder, the Shia cleric Abbas al-Musawi, was killed in 1992 when his motorcade was hit by missiles launched from Israeli helicopters. But for all the risks associated with being a visible member of any group which sets itself against Israel, or indeed just participates in Lebanese politics, Hezbollah's leadership since has been remarkably stable. Secretary-General Hassan Nasrallah and his deputy Sheikh Naim Qassem have overseen the establishment of a relatively competent parallel state in chronically dysfunctional Lebanon. In the largely Shia districts of South Beirut and southern Lebanon, Hezbollah operates schools, hospitals, clinics for its disabled veterans, and many other social services, and a formidable media apparatus. But Hezbollah's legitimacy among its adherents is derived principally from Hezbollah's military prowess. Hezbollah are fond of claiming to be the only Arab force ever to have defeated Israel on the battlefield, not only in forcing the 2000 withdrawal from Lebanon, but in fighting Israel to an inconclusive standstill in a 34-day war in 2006. When I visited Lebanon the following year, the road from Beirut's airport was lined with triumphant Hezbollah billboards. Hezbollah's present military strength is unclear. Nasrallah's claims of 100,000 fighters under arms is nigh certainly an exaggeration, but they are well equipped with drones, rockets and air defense systems, and hardened by years of fighting on Iran's behalf in the civil war next door in Syria.
Radwan is believed to number around 2,500 fighters, accounting for about 5% of Hezbollah's total assessed manpower. Its operatives appear to be far more capable than your average Hezbollah fighter, with training provided by the Sabarin commandos.
This broadcaster spent a bit of time with Hezbollah in Lebanon in 2001 and 2002, meeting foot soldiers, party workers and officials, including Deputy Secretary-General Qassem, to whom I was driven in bewildering circles in the back of a blacked-out Mercedes. I found them to be neither fanatical nor foolish. They took me on a tour of former Israeli bases in southern Lebanon, now repurposed as a sort of Hezbollah heritage trail, complete with plaques explaining the significance of each position. We also stopped by the notorious prison at Chatham, where Hezbollah guerrillas once held and tortured in its miserable cells by Israel's Lebanese proxies, now showed visitors around and sent them away with gift bags stuffed with Party of God merchandise. As Sheikh Qassem cheerfully confirmed even at the time, Hezbollah have long had an amount of contact with Hamas, both groups willing to overlook the traditional Shia-Sunni sectarian rancor in the service of their mutual grudge against Israel. But it would be an error to assume that Hamas and Hezbollah are basically the same thing. Hamas, especially in recent years, have self-evidently evolved into a theocratic death cult which regards the mass murder of Jews as an end in itself. Hezbollah are many bad things, but they're not crazy. They may, therefore, be even more dangerous. You are listening to a special live edition of The Foreign Desk, something made necessary by the fact that we had already recorded an entire episode analysing Hezbollah's current setup, strategy and ambitions before the first reports emerged of Israel's targeting of their Beirut headquarters. Record an episode about the Middle East, we thought. No way that gets overtaken by events. Before yesterday's airstrike, I spoke to Aurélie Daher, Associate Professor at the University of Paris-Dauphine in Paris and author of Hezbollah, Mobilization and Power, a book about the Hezbollah movement, its motivations and its members. I began by asking Aurélie about the relationship between Hassan Nasrallah and his deputy, Naim Qassem, who together had been running the organization for more than 30 years.
It's a complicated relationship because it turns out that Naim Qassem was already number two under the Secretary General that was in charge before Hassan Nasrallah. His name was Abbas al-Musawi. So Abbas al-Musawi was the Secretary General. Naim Qassem was his number two. And then when Abbas al-Musawi was assassinated by the Israeli army in 1992, Naim Qassem had, understandable hopes to become number one. The problem is that the leadership within the organization, so that young Hassan Nasrallah was more on the military level than and in the military milieus that Naim Qassem was a better fit to take over. So for some time we had rumors about Naim Qassem feeling a little bit bitter about that. Eventually, I think they're working well together in the sense that there is a clear distribution of tasks between the two. There's a joke between French scholars who work on Hezbollah. It's a little bit like the French president and prime minister. So the president, Hassan Nasrallah, is more into the military, the regional politics, the foreign policy, and the prime minister is running the house, at the domestic level. So that would be Naim Qassem.
Is there an extent now, though, to which Hezbollah is kind of a personality cult, that Hassan Nasrallah is a figure of that kind of importance? Would Hezbollah still function in the way it does? Would it still attract the support it does if he was no longer in charge of it?
I wouldn't talk about personality cult in the sense that it came more from the public, the audience of Hezbollah, who really fell in love, let's put it this way, with Hassan Nasrallah. But Hassan Nasrallah himself never encouraged that. And for instance, there's something very telling. There's no such thing as a biography or an official biography of Hassan Nasrallah by the organization or such, and he is against it. So it's more that he has a certain track, a certain history. He did things that eventually made him very popular. And there is, yes, a kind of a real adoration for the character. But it's not something that came from the party. It didn't come from the top. It came from the bottom, from the audience, from the public. So obviously, there would be big shoes to fill in for his successor. His successor would have to prove to be up to the legend of Hassan Nasrallah. Another thing is that Hassan Nasrallah is actually quite a safe bet, I would say, even for the adversaries of Hezbollah. Even if people, the people who do not like Hezbollah maybe do not realize how lucky they are to have somebody like Hassan Nasrallah at the head of the organization, because at the end of the day, Hassan Nasrallah is more interested in what happens at the regional level and tends to leave the Lebanese, especially Lebanese who are not Shia who disagree with Hezbollah. He tends to recommend to leave them alone. There's no persecution, no retaliation, no whatever. He's rather liberal when it comes to people criticizing him, etc. I'm not sure if we were to have in the future other leaders, other people at the head of the organization, I am not sure that they would be as tolerant and as patient as he is. And the problem is when you have somebody who's not patient, who's not tolerant at the head of an organization that is so powerful, so well equipped, well armed, well trained as Hezbollah, that's not good news for the adversaries of Hezbollah.
That was Aurélie Daher, author of the book Hezbollah, Mobilization and Power. You're listening to a special live edition of The Foreign Desk. This is a special live edition of the Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller, and joining me now are Yossi Mekelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, and Lina Khatib, also Associate Fellow for the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Yossi, we'll start with you. This is obviously not the first time that Israel has targeted an individual. It's not even the first time Israel has targeted Hassan Nasrallah. Nevertheless, do you find yourself surprised by this?
A little bit, yes, because my initial thoughts when it all started to back 10 days ago with the pager exploding and then gradually the escalation with air bombardment talking about ground invasion. I think that my thought was they're trying to force Hassan Nasrallah to the negotiation table to reach a deal about enforcement resolution 1701 and then make sure that Hezbollah withdraws to the Litani River. Now, obviously, this was a game changer. Obviously, they don't want to negotiate with Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah, but eliminate the entire leadership and reduce its capability as much as possible. So I think there was an element of surprise. On the other hand, that this was the rhetoric for a very long time.
Yossi, just to follow that up, what do you think would have been Israel's calculus on the for and against doing this? As we were hearing from the previous guest, there might have been a better the devil you know argument in favour of leaving Nasrallah out of the recent campaign of assassinations.
Yeah, when one creates a vacuum, not only in terms of leadership, but also with the Hezbollah, different things. You can look at more positive scenarios. You can look even a worse scenario, and that's now it's done. So Israel needs to deal with the fallout of this, whether they're going to be a ground invasion, how they're going to reach out to other elements within the region and say this is as far as we would like to go, how the international community is going to respond to that. And we tend to forget there is still a war in Gaza, how all of this is connected.
Lina, to bring you in, we still have not, as of this broadcast, had any word from Hezbollah itself. There's been no confirmation from them that Nasrallah is dead. But if we do hear from Hezbollah that this is confirmed, that Nasrallah is dead, how should we expect whatever is left of Hezbollah to respond to this?
They will definitely announce a successor, and most likely the announcement will come from Tehran, not from Hezbollah itself. Just looking at the footage of the damage caused by the bombing, it becomes clear that recovering bodies is not going to be easy, and for Hezbollah to verify that Nasrallah has been killed, they basically need to kind of, find the body. And also, meanwhile, Tehran will be busy preparing the announcement of who will succeed Nasrallah. I think the decision is most likely already made regarding who will be announced. It's just a matter of how it's done. And when it comes to what this means for the rest of Hezbollah, of course, this is a huge blow to the organization. It will not cause it to collapse, but definitely this is a significant loss. And it also confirms the vulnerability of Hezbollah vis-a-vis Israel, which will definitely be felt across the organization. So the killing of Nasrallah is not just about killing someone who was part of the strategic kind of planning and leadership for Hezbollah, but it also exposes the group's weakness vis-a-vis Israel. And this is something that the rest of the organization will be thinking about what to do, in this regard.
Lina, I'll follow that up because you mention Iran. We have heard from the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in the last hour or so. He didn't really say terribly much. It seemed like a fairly phoned-in, pro forma, placeholder kind of statement, talking about how Israel is far too small to cause any significant damage to the strongholds of Hezbollah, which is a debatable assertion in the current circumstances. But we've not heard much from Iran even before this by way of response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas chairman in Tehran. Will Iran feel obliged to make some great demonstration of vengeance for the passing of Nasrallah, or might Iran now be thinking we're probably best off not pushing our luck?
Iran wants to stay out of it because its key concern is self-preservation. This is why Iran has not intervened militarily in this conflict beyond symbolism, really. The killing of Haniyeh is not equivalent to the killing of Nasrallah because Hezbollah is the most valuable asset that Iran has in its regional influence in the Middle East. However, Iran is always thinking long term, and if it intervenes in any significant way, then it will be inviting Israeli retaliation, which would hit Iran itself, and that's not what it wants. And Israel has now shown that it is prepared to go further than many had expected it to go. So Iran will be concerned that whatever used to be considered a red line in not the too distant past is now no longer the case.
Yossi, you were in Israel reasonably recently. On the basis of that recollection and what you may have seen in Israeli media this morning, where will the public mood in Israel be between, there will be an amount of happiness, I'm sure, at the demise of an indefatigable enemy of Israel, but will there be an amount of trepidation as well about what happens now?
I think this is exactly it. I think between the kind of satisfaction of eliminating one of almost a symbol of the enmity of Iran and the enmity comes from Lebanon to Israel. Symbolically, it's important. I think many Israelis will receive this news with satisfaction. On the other hand, naturally, the fear is still there because for many years, everyone in Israel hears about the military capabilities of Hezbollah to hit every point, every city, every town and village in Israel. Are they still capable of doing that? And with that, whether Iran is going to join. I completely agree with Lina that Iran has no appetite to do that. So far, they preferred always that are the proxies operates and they stay away from direct intervention. But what happened last night is losing one of their major assets in the Middle East. It will push also Iran to rethink its policy in the region.
Lina, I want to take a look at how this might play out across the rest of the Arab Middle East, absent Iran. Is it fair to assume that whatever they may say publicly, most Arab governments, with the possible exception of Syria, won't be terribly upset about this?
I mean, for countries in the Gulf in particular, seeing a weakened Iran in terms of its regional role would be music to their ears. This is something they had been waiting for more than a decade, and it has not happened. And so to see it happening, they would breathe, I think, a sigh of relief, because Iran has been posing a very concrete security threat, mainly to Gulf countries. And in other countries where Iran has been intervening outside of the Gulf, like Lebanon and Syria, there are many who will also want to turn a page in terms of dealing with Iran's regional influence that has only brought catastrophe, frankly, to those countries. So yeah, there will be many who will actually be quite happy, I think, about the elimination of Nasrallah and the weakening of Hezbollah.
And just to follow that up, Lina, not just among Arab governments, but I mean, I know it's impossible to generalize about public opinion across the Arab world, but is that likely to trickle down to the public as well? Will there be a lot of people thinking that this might actually make where we live a slightly calmer place?
I mean, people in northwest Syria are already celebrating, distributing sweets after hearing the news that Nasrallah has been killed. Well, at least that's what Israel has confirmed. Hezbollah itself is yet to confirm, but people have already started celebrating. And this just underlines how scarred people are in areas like that by the experience of having been on the receiving end of Hezbollah's brutality alongside Hezbollah's allies. And so, yeah, definitely at the level of the public, there will also be a degree of not relief as such, because this at the moment is not changing dynamics for the people on the ground, but definitely at least vindication to a degree.
Yossi, I'll come back to you finally. This is obviously going to be a big story that consumes the world's attention over coming days and weeks. But from where we are right now, having only known about this for a few hours, does this feel to you more like it might be the end of something or more like it might be the beginning of something else?
I think it can be one or the other. But I don't think, and I think the Israeli military already announced that, it has other tools in its toolbox. In other words, depends what Hezbollah is doing next, depends what Iran is doing next. So if they actually manage to force them into accepting that they broke the equation of the balance of power between the two, that will allow for 60,000 Israelis to go back to their homes in the north, that can be the beginning of the end. But if not, I think there is a real thinking about following what happened last night also with ground invasion. But one of the things that might change is the link between what happens in Lebanon and what happened in Gaza. Hassan Nasrallah insisted that if there is a ceasefire, an agreement in Gaza, then the firing of rockets and missiles will stop from Lebanon. The question what the next leadership is doing and whether it also allows Israel to go back to a deal and strike a deal with Hamas. So there is an opening there, but there are different calculations also for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yossi Mekelberg and Lina, Khatib, both of Chatham House, thank you very much for joining us here on the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. That's it for this special live episode of The Foreign Desk. And just as we close, Hezbollah are now confirming that Secretary-General Hassan Nasrallah died in yesterday's airstrike. Monocle Radio will, of course, be following this story across all our news shows in coming days. And you can also subscribe to our free daily email newsletters for further analysis. We'll be back next week for a look at the state of Gaza and the prospects for peace nearly 1 year after the October 7th attack on Israel. And look out for the Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Chris Chermak and Mariella Bevan. Special thanks also to Jack Dewars, who edited our originally recorded version of this episode and produced this week's Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email chris@cc@monocle.com. From me, Andrew Mueller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
2024 is a defining year for global politics as more people head to the polls than ever before. How will shifts in power impact you? The Financial Times provides fearless thinking in defining moments. Its trusted journalists provide impartial analysis of the economy, politics, and business, so you can join the dots and see the full picture. Start reading the Financial Times at ft.com.